How do you think Canada did in managing the COVID-19 pandemic? Not so great, it turns out, according to a new report. And now some medical experts across Canada are calling for an independent inquiry into Canada's response to the pandemic. Now, I'm sure you recall throughout the crisis, we turned very regularly to Dr. CHRISTOPHER Labos for his insight, his advice, sometimes just a calming voice in the midst of all that chaos. He is a cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology. You can hear him at 8:10 on Sunday mornings right here on CJAD 800 on weekends with Ken, and he joins us again now. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Labos.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So firstly, what do you think of these findings that Canada actually didn't do such a great job of managing the pandemic? And I guess the main thing to seize upon is that the only reason we fared all right is because we were so proactive in getting vaccinated. Otherwise, I guess things would have been much worse. What do you think of all this?
Yeah, I think that's largely true. We did fare better than a lot of other countries, but we didn't do as well as some others. And I think when you read through the BMJ articles, they do sort of make that point. We tend to classify ourselves relative to the U.S. or maybe the U.K. when we look to Europe. But there were a lot of other countries that did certain things a lot better than us. Think contact tracing, think screening people at airports. So we did do very well at getting the vaccines early and rolling it out to the population in a short period of time. And that's largely why we did better
than other countries. Yeah. Okay. So obviously it makes sense that we're taking a look back right now, right? And that we're trying to figure out what went wrong and how we can do better going forward. Are we going to find out those answers that we really need to find out, do you think?
Well, I think to a certain extent, we already know what went wrong. And I think these articles pointed out a lot of the things that we didn't do that well, like hoarding vaccines when, frankly, we should have been better at, getting excess doses to developing countries that drastically needed them. So it's not so much about figuring out what went wrong, because to a large degree, we know what went wrong. There was, inconsistency in the response between provinces rather than having a coordinated response. There was confusion about who was in charge of what when it came to airports. So these are the issues. We sort of identified them. The real strategy here is fixing them so that the next time something like this happens, we don't have the same issues, that we don't start, let's say the next time there's a pandemic of some kind, that we don't end up with the problem we had at the beginning, which was a shortage of just basic medical supplies, gloves, masks, gowns, just the basics of what do we do when we need surge capacity in hospitals. So it's really about having a plan so that we're not, if you remember this saying from the beginning of the pandemic, trying to build the plane as we were trying to fly it. No, we should have the planes already built. They should be there. We should know who's responsible for what so that we don't have issues of not having enough reagents to actually make COVID tests, to actually test people like we were having trouble at the beginning of the pandemic.
So that makes me think immediately of the fact that we hoarded vaccines was largely, I think, due to the fact that we weren't producing our own vaccines, right? So we were trying to grab as many of everyone else's that we could possibly get. Has that situation been alleviated? Because I remember a huge plant that was being built here in outside of Montreal that has now been closed. It never went forward. So will we find ourselves in a similar situation again, perhaps?
Well, it's possible, right? And that's the issue. Now, we don't necessarily need to, manufacture vaccines in this country. I think it would probably be a good idea if we did. But as long as we had an international system in place for how we would share vaccines, you don't necessarily need to do that. And that's what COVAX was supposed to be. If you remember the COVAX program, it was supposed to be about sharing doses between countries. It didn't really work. So we need to identify why didn't it work? Why didn't the app that the federal government was trying to put out, that contact tracing app, that didn't really work? Well, what were the reasons behind it? And can we now build stuff to have in place that we can use it should we ever need it in the future? And that's really what the public inquiry, that everyone's calling for, is to really address this issue and fix the problem so that we learn the lessons from COVID and, frankly, learn the lessons we didn't learn from SARS. We often say that COVID was unprecedented, and to a large degree that's true, but we did go through a epidemic of a coronavirus in this country. We called it SARS, and it happened less than 20 years ago, and we didn't really learn the lessons from that and be well prepared for the next time it happened. which was, COVID in 2020.
I'm thinking, too, about how this is a study on how Canada fared in managing the COVID-19 pandemic compared to other countries. And yet there was so much, it varied so much from province to province in terms of the handling and the things that went wrong in particular provinces. I know that our elderly are most vulnerable and most devastated from coast to coast. But in Quebec in particular, I think that was our largest failure. You have such a unique perspective on it, having been engrossed in all this information from day one. What do you see as being the main shortfalls and where things went wrong? And I would ask more specifically in Quebec, perhaps.
Well, I think you pointed out the main one, which is what happened in long-term care homes, where a lot of people died. And, people say, well, that was inevitable. Well, I'm not convinced it was. Now, maybe we didn't have the information at our disposal. Maybe we didn't react as fast as we did. Maybe we didn't appreciate how bad things were going to get, and that may all be true. But that's the reason to have these types of inquiries, to look back and say, okay, this didn't go well. What should we have done differently? What strategies can we put in place to make sure it doesn't happen? What are the rules for transferring somebody to hospital if you're in a long-term care home? Were we too slow on those things? And I think to a large degree we were. And that's the point of having a public inquiry. It's not to assign blame, which is how a lot of people see it, unfortunately, but it's to identify the shortcomings in the system so you can address them going forward. And what happened with long-term care, I think, is a prime example of how the system, I think, failed a lot of people, and how we need to put better safeguards in place to make sure that doesn't happen again. And we talked about this, right? People were talking about having inquiries in long-term care. We were talking about, should we still have private long-term care homes versus public ones? Those were all very reasonable debates to be had, just that we stopped talking about it as we stopped seeing so many COVID cases. So now, even if you want to sort of maintain the argument that COVID is over, which I don't think it really is, but even if you want to say, well, COVID is not a real danger anymore, well, okay, now's the time to have those conversations to fix the problem, because there will be something else in the future. Even if it's not COVID, there will be other outbreaks, other diseases, other things that put strain on our system. We need to have solutions in place to address the shortcomings which COVID largely exposed.
Okay, so I want to say I really do see the importance of an inquiry like this, and yet I think a lot of the lessons that we really truly need to learn, we should know already, like how we treat our healthcare workers, right? I mean, we don't need an inquiry to tell us that we've blown it on that front.
No, we don't. But what we need an inquiry is to have some sort of formal report that you can, hold governments to account against. And, people are cynical and they say, well, we've had this before and governments don't listen. And, that's true. I mean, if the government thinks they can ignore a report, whichever government of whatever political party, if they think they can ignore a report's recommendations and that they'll get away with it, they may. But I think it's still important to have that, so that we have that roadmap in place, because, yes, we can speak in general about these things. We need to treat healthcare workers better, because otherwise they'll just leave, which is what happened. We had a massive exodus of healthcare workers. But we need to have a solution to that in place, to know that when there is something like this, what solutions do we have? Can we bring people out of retirement? Do we have a pathway to automatically certify international medical graduates? Do we have systems in place to allow people to move from province to province? A lot of the things that we kind of did, but we did on an ad hoc basis, sort of figuring it out as we go, rather than being like, oh, we have an emergency, break glass to get Plan B out of the storage compartment and then put that into place.
Yeah. And I mean, I think we can just start by not overworking and underpaying the people working. I mean, it's we need them, and we need them to be in top shape and stick around and do those jobs in a crisis or in regular times. I think we're out of time, but the last thing I wanted to just ask you is, do you think, have we learned what we need to learn, or are we in the process of learning it so that we are prepared for the next emergency? Will we be okay for the next pandemic, for the next crisis?
I think we learned some things and we didn't learn other things. We learned how important and how dangerous airborne spread of viruses were, which we didn't really appreciate before. I think we are inching our way towards better air quality in indoor spaces, but there's a lot of complacency there. But a lot of the other things, like how do we do screening at airports, contact tracing, we seem not to want to talk about it anymore. And I think we're going to be caught flat-footed again should we have a similar problem at some point in the future.
As always, Dr. Labos, thank you so much for your time and your insights. So appreciated.
My pleasure. You take care.
You too. That is Dr. Christopher Labos, cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology. You can catch him 8:10 on Sunday mornings with Ken right here on CJAD 800.